been a while since Tampa Bay has had to play second fiddle in Florida, but with their core still very much intact, do the Lightning have one more championship run left in them? This is the 2025-26 deep dive on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Hello and welcome to team number 4 on my NHL deep dive series, and team number 4 on my preseason power rankings. We have the Tampa Bay Lightning, who were a first round exit in the playoffs last season, but in fairness, they lost to the Florida Panthers in the first round, so I give them a little bit of leeway, a lenience there. But this is really a fascinating team because the Lightning have the disadvantage of having to go through Florida in one of the first 2 rounds in order to, get themselves to the Final Four and get themselves a puncher's shot at the Stanley Cup. And clearly, I mean, there's 4 teams left. 2 of them are from the same division. That makes things difficult, and your path to victory is hard in the Atlantic because of that. And when I look at the Lightning's roster, it's a team that still has some very, very good parts of it, but it's also a team that I have some concerns about. And again, we're talking about the fourth best, my 4th best team in the NHL as of right now. So the concerns are a lot more nitpicky than they are for the teams that were in the 20s and the 20s and the teens. So take that as it is, but I'm still going to point out the issues that I have. But again, this is moving like a university paper from an A to an A plus instead of from a C to a B. So the margins here are a lot smaller, so it's going to seem a little nitpicky throughout the Lightning roster. I mean, this is a very good team. They have an excellent coaching staff, still a very strong core. There's a lot to like about the Tampa Bay Lightning. And as we jump into kind of their overall grades here, you can see that they're a very well-rounded team. 5th in offense, 6th in defense, 5th in goaltending, 8th in special teams, and 7th in coaching culture. And I can see Lightning fans maybe being upset about the 5th in goaltending rank. I think Andrei Vasilevskiy has declined from where he was when this team was winning Stanley Cups, most notably in his playoff numbers. That's something that doesn't get talked about a ton with Vasilevskiy because he has that cup experience, so people kind of give him a pass. But he's struggled the last couple years in the postseason. We talk about Connor Hellebuyck's numbers being very bad. His numbers are very identical to what Vasilevskiy's put up the last couple years. So, I think that's definitely something that we can see there. The blue line as well has taken a bit of a step down. Victor Hedman's still obviously very good, but Ryan McDonagh is getting older, although still very effective. And I think that the depth on their blue line is worse than it has been in years past. Offensively, this is still a really, really good offense, and I actually think that it's the biggest strength on this roster overall. Special teams unit is very good, and the coaching culture is good. But again, I've lost a little bit of faith in what Julien BriseBois has been able to do over the last couple of years since the Blake Coleman, Barclay Goodrow trades that I praise very heavily. There's been some missteps. I think of the David Savard move. I think of the Tanner Jeannot move, obviously. His deadline last year with Bjorkstrand and Yanni Gourde I thought was very good. But so there's been some misses as well as the hits. And I think that's kind of lowered his stock for me a little bit. But again, the gap in the top 10 between the management teams is pretty good. Is pretty minimal, I should say. So let's jump into that coaching staff. And Julien BriseBois, again, B+, I think is fair for where he is. I mean, he gets a lot of criticism for not being the one who fully built the Stanley Cup roster. And I criticize some of the moves that he's made post the Stanley Cup roster. So, that's kind of where the overall grade comes in. Again, I think he's done some good things as well. But overall, I think that there's been hits and misses for him. John Cooper, on the other hand, I think he's still one of the best coaches in the NHL. He's still one of the best 3 or 4 coaches in the league, for sure. And I don't think I'm going to get a ton of pushback on that. Again, his main losses have come to Paul Maurice, who I think is also in discussion to be the best coach in the NHL right now. So he hasn't, he doesn't have a ton of losses on his resume to bad coaches, right? He's lost to some very, very good teams. And I think that that's a positive for him, right? I don't think you can really hang your head too much when you're, consistently losing to teams that go on to win Stanley Cups. As for their status right now, I think contenders fair. They're obviously in that group. The problem obviously is, as I said, that they have to go through, the Florida Panthers. But if you've been paying attention, they're the second best Eastern Conference team that I have currently on my rankings. And the issue with that is that they're going to have to play the number one, the best team in the Eastern Conference, in my opinion, right now, at some point before the third round, likely, right? Like, as long as they both finish top three in the division, which I expect to happen. They're going to have to play an early matchup against, another Stanley Cup contender, and that's just kind of the pitfall of the divisional format that we use in the NHL now, and I could go on a whole rant about that. But overall, just looking at this team objectively on paper, they have to be considered a contender, right? And like, if you can get over the hurdle that is the Florida Panthers, then yeah, I think that they have to be the favorites to come out of the East. If not for the Panthers, just based on that, on overall value. Obviously, we can talk about strength of pathway to get there, and then in that case, maybe the Hurricanes have the better odds to get out of the East. But in terms of like just pure roster, like if we had to rank the 1 to 8, like I'm pretty confident in putting them at number 2, not just because of the experience, but because the roster is still very good. And kind of as we go through this team, you'll be able to see what I mean by that overall. Again, I think there's some issues, but as we move up into these top teams, the issues really aren't as prevalent as they are for other teams in the league, obviously. We look at their numbers from last year, and again, it was very, very good. They were very effective last season, right? And I think that there is room for a little bit of regression in terms of what this team did. They're 4th in goals for, 15th in expected goals for. Evolving Hockey had them a little bit higher in expected goals for, but still relatively around that side. I mean, 5th in goals against, 8th in expected goals against. I expect similar results there. Their goal share being 3rd and their expected goal share being 10th. Again, you think that the goal share might drop a little bit overall, but like in regression, I think it more is going to come on the offensive side. But again, this team still has very good finishers, right? Like they still have Nikita Kucherov, who's a best in the world talent. They still have Jake Ensel, who I absolutely love. They still have Braden Point, who I love. Their depth is still really good. So the numbers last year point to like some possible regression, but again, this is a team that still has some top end talent, so it's hard to just assume that that's going to happen. But I mean, either their expected goals numbers will go up, or I think it might be hard for them to finish top 5 in goals for if they're still middle of the pack in their expected numbers. I think that's a reasonable opinion to have there. But again, like their offense talent is good. I'm not really worried about that. Defensively, this is a really strong team, and obviously, the special teams 5th in power play, 5th in penalty kill. It is solid there as well. So a team that finished 7th in the league last year in terms of points, 2nd in the division. I'd expect a similar type finish for them, maybe even higher in the overall standings. But again, this is a team that doesn't really care about regular season results anyway. So it's going to be about what they can do in the playoffs and setting themselves up to be able to get past the Florida Panthers. And the Leafs are good too. They're a top 10 team as well. And then obviously teams like Carolina and Washington or whoever comes out of the Metro. And then the bigger picture being the Stanley Cup. The road to the finals isn't easy. For the two teams that are left here in the Atlantic, because they're going to have to go through, in all likelihood, another top 6 team in every single round. And that makes things difficult, right? If that's the case. So, for Tampa Bay, it's not necessarily about the regular season results. It's going to be about the playoffs. And obviously last year was a disappointment to them, but, the thing you can hang your hat on if it helps is that, you're losing to the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. We look at this offense, and again, I think it's a really well-rounded group. I think that this team has some really nice pieces that I like, and they're very top to bottom built very well, right? You obviously have your top guys, like at the top of the lineup, your offensive creators in Kucherov, Point, and Jake Ensel, who are one of the best trios in the NHL there. But the depth on this team is really good too. Brandon Hagel might be the most underrated player in the NHL for what he can do, and I think him getting Four Nations love and likely Olympic roster love for Team Canada is going to help raise his stock a little bit. He's a name that people might look at a little bit and be like, that's an intriguing name, but it was easily the best pickup of Julian Brisebois's run in Tampa Bay, and he's been exceptional value for this team. Anthony Cirelli is somebody who really bounced back last year in my mind too, after a pretty down year the season before. He had an extremely strong season for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They bring in Oliver Bjorkstrand, they bring in Yanni Gourde to add some depth into the middle six here, and both players are still very effective, albeit not what they were a couple years ago, pre-Seattle. But again, like Tampa's been a team that's been able to get the best out of players of that style, so I'd expect them to both have solid seasons, if not a bit of positive regression for either of those guys. Nick Paul, Zenit Girgensons they bring in, Pontus Holmberg they bring in, Connor Geeky's still there, who I really like. The depth on this team is really good. They have some good, defensive guys. They have some guys who can generate a bit of offense. In players like Yanni Gourde and Oliver Bjorkstrand in that bottom six area. You have players like Nick Paul and Holmberg and Geeky who can add a bit of offense there as well. So, the secondary scoring might not be great, but the defensiveness of the bottom six is really good. And this is going to be a team that I think is built in terms of their forward core. I think this is the most well-rounded group they've had since their second Stanley Cup victory. And in terms of that, I think that gives them a very good edge, right? A full season of Bjorkstrand, full season of Yanni Gourde in that middle six is going to be very helpful as well, especially in the top six. It's one of the best top sixes in the NHL, period. Certainly one of the best that we've seen to this point in the series, and even the bottom six, I think, has a ton of talent and a lot of upside there as well. We begin with Nikita Kucherov, and I'm just going to kind of ignore his defensive numbers because they don't really matter for the type of player that he is, but certainly one of the best offensive players in the league. Now he is 31 going on 32. He's getting up there, coming out of his prime, I guess now, heading kind of into the back half of his career. But still one of the best, creators in the NHL. His ability to just find space with the puck and create offensive chances is one of the best in the NHL. He can play in any type of role you really want him to. He can be your assist guy. He can be one of the best finishers in the league. He has a ton of skill there. Obviously they've surrounded him with very good players as well, which has helped. I mean, obviously he had Stamkos earlier in his career. Now with Point and Gensel, they've really done a good job of maintaining their aggressiveness in trying to keep this window open as long as they have Kucherov. And I really think that that's helped them elevate to this next level and continue to be a legitimate threat in the Eastern Conference. And yeah, Kucherov's defensive numbers aren't great. I don't really care. His offensive value is the surplus on offensive value here is so high that it doesn't bother me all that much. And he's playing against high competition. He's one of the best finishers in the league. He's one of the best passers in the league, and I think he's kind of underrated in terms of his primary assist opportunities, and that's just because he's opening up lanes due to how much defenses have to be play him honestly, and commit to him, and it opens up things for the rest of the team, and that in itself helps create offense as well. So just such a dynamic offensive player. I mean, certainly one of the best offensive players in the league. And he's shown that year over year. He's always in the MVP case, in the MVP race. He's always brought up in terms of the heart, and it's much deserved. Nikita Kucherov is an absolute beast offensively, and I don't see that slowing down much in the next couple of years at least. And that's kind of when Tampa Bay's window is going to be, at least in this iteration of the team, barring a very aggressive move maybe this summer. I don't know. But it certainly seems like Kucherov's going to be near the top of the league as long as the Tampa Bay Lightning as a whole are going to be competitive. Braden Point's kind of in the same boat. Again, I think a guy that just doesn't really get a ton of attention as being a top center in the NHL, which is strange because they won back-to-back cups with him being the top center on the team. But I feel like when people talk about the best centers in the league, he kind of gets overlooked, and it's weird because Alex Barkov has been hyped up like crazy, and he's been on a worse team for most of his career, and also plays in Florida. So there's no real reason why the center for the better team in Tampa Bay for most of his career. Obviously now the Panthers are better than the Lightning are, but throughout their entire careers, I feel Barkov was getting the the conversation about being, a top 10 super underrated center, and Braden Point kind of wasn't, which made Braden Point a lot more underrated in my mind, but that's besides the point. Braden Point is just so good at like so many different things, and he's very effective at being a very good possession center, somebody who can get into the zone very effectively. He can create chances for the team, and he really adds that extra value to this team, and does a lot of the little things that he might not get credit for, because people are going to look at the point totals, especially for a number one line center, but he does a lot of the small things, and just his transition game, his ability to create offense off the rush. And I mean, he has the benefit of playing with exceptional wingers too, which definitely help in that sense. But Braden Point is somebody that I'm always going to bang the drum for. I think that he's the insanely underrated center. Doesn't get enough love in kind of the top 10 top centers in the league conversation, kind of in that next tier under the McKinnons and McDavids of the world, and I think he needs to start being looked at as part of that category. Jake Guentzel is kind of the third guy on this team, and he's the guy that doesn't get it. I kind of feel bad for Jake Guentzel, because I feel like he's always been the underappreciated, like, elite forward on every team he's been on. When he was in Pittsburgh, in the really good Pittsburgh years, Crosby and Malkin were the clear like 1 and 2 on his team, and then as the team got worse, he obviously leapfrogged Kenny Malkin, but Sidney Crosby was always still there. And then now in Tampa Bay, it's very much Point and Kucherov, and then you obviously have Hedman and Vasilevsky, who are also bigger stars than he is. So he's kind of like hitting himself in the back again. But I mean, Jake Guentzel's a really special player in his own right, and I really feel like he's been given a really nice pathway here just to carve out a really good end of his career now in Tampa Bay. Obviously he had the stint in Carolina too, but just being a really really reliable scoring winger on that line. He can drive play a bit as well, and at a pretty decent level. But he doesn't really have to, because like Kucherov and Point are going to be there to do a lot of that work. And even if he gets bumped to another line, I think Cirelli really proved last year that he could do that. You still have guys like Hagel, and it's really, you can kind of just throw any of this top 6 around and just jumble it up however you want, and you're gonna find success if you're the Lightning here. And Jake Guentzel just gives them another super super high end elite winger offensively to pair with that group, and it's created this really hard top 6 to play against. And even the Panthers had trouble with it last year. Like the Lightning's top 6 basically matched what the Panthers were doing. It was just the Panthers' depth is what won them that first round series. And if you can go toe to toe with the best team in the NHL, it gives you an advantage here. And I do think the Lightning have done a good job building up their bottom 6, which was the problem in that series. But in terms of their top 6, guys like Jake Guentzel are super underrated and extremely useful for what this team's trying to do. Brandon Hagel is again just another guy who is very underrated. He signed the $6.5 million deal for 7 years, which is good for his being 26. Just a fantastic two-way player, just one of those guys who is very good everywhere. Jack of all trades type player. Even his scoring is pretty high. His finishing rate isn't the best, but he's getting a lot of shots, gets a lot of goals off those. His passing is pretty good. He plays against super high competition rates, but his ability to create offense is massively underrated. And even in Chicago, I don't think they're getting the most out of him, and then now in Tampa Bay, obviously, he's just thrived, heading into the prime of his career, and even defensively too. I mean, he's really 23-24 was the year where he broke out as a very high end defensive winger as well, and now he's just one of these super underrated elite two-way wingers, and like I said, kind of in the beginning there, a guy who's going to get a lot of looks for Team Canada, and obviously he played on the Four Nations team. And I'd expect him to make Team Canada as well. I don't think that's much of a stretch at this point, especially from what we continue to see from him. John Cooper's clearly comfortable with him, and he's just massively underrated. Now, his power play numbers aren't very good, but this Lightning team is stacked with high-end offensive players. His power play numbers don't really worry me that much. He plays on the penalty kill. He's a above average penalty killer, so really a guy you can throw around the entire lineup, and you're going to get some pretty good results from. Anthony Cirelli, man, he had a exceptional quote-unquote bounce-back season last year. He's a guy who, for 2 years now, previous to this, I had some concerns about. It seemed like his numbers had kind of died down a little bit. He wasn't putting up as many, exceptional, like, quote-unquote analytical seasons. And it was becoming kind of a discussion around, Tampa Bay that this is becoming, something to be concerned about. But, man, last year he just thrived. He was able to generate a ton of offense on his own, and his expected goals against numbers were fantastic as well. He was a great defensive center. Just became a really, really strong two-way center. Again, somebody who got some looks at the Four Nations roster and raised some eyebrows. I mean, I wasn't a big fan of him, being in that discussion. But by the end of the season, I think that he's definitely somebody who I have taken back some of my criticisms on from last year. You can go watch my Lightning video from last year if you want to kind of get more nuanced into that. But I think last year he really was able to reestablish himself as a high-end second line center, and really was able to get that back. And I think my only concern here is just the finishing ability, and the power play numbers are a bit of a concern. But again, when you're generating an insanely high volume of chances, the puck's just going to kind of find its way into the back of the net. It's very 2010s Brandon Gallagher, that kind of philosophy where it's like, if you just get to the net and get pucks to the net, eventually you're going to go in. So I'm not super concerned about that, right? And it really shows this kind of distinction between the top two groups of these forwards, right? Because you have your Gensel, Point, and Kucherov group, which is very much like a high skilled, we're gonna just outskill you basically. And then you have the second group of these forwards, right, with the Brandon Hagels, the Anthony Cirellis, and then you jump into somebody like Oliver Bjorkstrand too, and it's very much we're just going to outbeat you by just beating you down, and eventually the puck's going to go in the net. And like I said, Bjorkstrand's numbers in Seattle took a step down, but I do think that in a John Cooper system, his numbers will be elevated again, and I'm not particularly concerned about that. Even when he came into Tampa, we saw some of his numbers jump back up to where a lot of people thought they were going to be, when he is where they were in Columbus, and then what we kind of expected from Seattle. So I really think a full year of Bjorkstrand in the Tampa Bay system is going to do wonders for him. He was somebody who really could never figure it out fully in Seattle, and I do think that the John Cooper system is like perfect for a guy like Oliver Bjorkstrand. Nick Paul's an interesting one because he signed this crazy like $3.2 million deal for the next 50 years. And he's somebody that has been a valuable defensive bottom six forward for this team. He's playing against not great competition, but his offensive numbers are pretty poor. He's very much a low event player who has good finishing, and his finishing has been like miles above what he's been creating anyway. So I don't think that there's much regression to happen there at this point. Like, it's happened for 3 years in a row now. I'm not gonna bang the drum and say that his offensive number is gonna fall off a cliff, but defensively he is still a very strong defensive center. And for a team with this much offense and this much creativity in their top six, having a guy like Nick Paul who can just kind of like weather the storm and be more of a shutdown presence on this team, along with guys like the Pontus Holmbergs and the Zemgus Girgensons of the world, it does give the Lightning a very difficult bottom six to play against. And this is a team that won a Stanley Cup because they had a bottom six that was hard to play against. Now, Nick Paul doesn't have the Blake Coleman type dual threat ability that they had, and even Barclay Goodrow to a lesser extent at that point. But I think that the top six, as well as guys like like Geeky and Yanni Gord, can kind of bring that offensive spark to the lineup. Maybe not from the center position, but from more of a winger position. So having just a good shutdown, third line center Nick Paul is actually going to be a pretty good value for them. And for $3.2 million, it's a little bit expensive for my liking, especially for a low event player. But I don't think it's a contract that's like astronomically bad. I just think it's like fine for what he brings, but just having kind of somebody who can step in, you can play in those defensive situations and get decent results out of is nice for a team that's trying to win a Stanley Cup. Like I talked about Yanni Gord, and a lot of my Yanni Gord talk is going to be similar to the Bjorkstrand talk. I mean, he's somebody that, but just to I'm more confident in Yanni Gord working out. Now, I don't think he's going to get back to the level that he was at pre-expansion draft, right? I don't think he's going to be this insane, middle six forward who can just be a Swiss Army knife around the lineup. But I do think that he's still going to add some value in the bottom six, right? I think that there's less of a runway with him turning back the clock than there is with Oliver Bjorkstrand, just because of age and wear and everything. But Yanni Gord is somebody that we know works in the John Cooper system because he's done it, right? He won 2 Stanley Cups in the John Cooper system. So I'm really not I have no worries about Yanni Gord not absolutely flopping here, and I think that's why it was such a good pickup, because it was something familiar, right? It's very much the Riley Smith back to Vegas, where he struggled once he left, but he's somebody that you can just plug back into that system and make it work. So Yanni Gord, I have no concerns about. I'm actually really excited to see how they use him, because the top six is pretty locked down. So I think using Yanni Gord as kind of a gadget player in the bottom six is actually going to be insanely useful, and they're going to get some good value out of that, because he's somebody they can just kind of throw out, and teams aren't going to be really ready for it, because he still does have some of that dynamic offensive ability. He still has decent defensive numbers. So he's somebody that can kind of be really useful in the bottom six. That's not it's gonna be harder to game plan for, especially on a night by night basis in the regular season, because teams are really going to key on your best players. And Yanni Gord's somebody I could see winning a couple games for Tampa Bay, just because he's getting favorable matchups, because the top six is getting most of the defensive keys from the other team. Zemgus Girgensons I talked about a little bit, but very underrated defensively, right? Former All-Star, by the way, Zemgus Girgensons. Again, somebody, last year, the offensive numbers are pretty poor. They have been for a while, but they were really able to get, elite defensive play out of him last season against, not great competition, but, in enough of a role where, you could run Paul and Girgensons as your, defensive wall kind of players and be pretty happy with that. So I think that overall the Lightning should be happy with that bottom 2 center core, especially if you can get Anthony Cirelli to continue off the season that he had last year. Then you can run Paul and Girgensons just as your defensive kind of guys and be able to get the offense from the top 6, which should be more than enough. So I think, in terms of how this Lightning team is built, I wouldn't normally like to have 2 guys that are very much similar in terms of, pretty poor offensive output, but really good defensively. As my 3 and 4 center, I think I would rather only have 1 on most teams. But based on, how overwhelmingly good the Lightning offense should be in the top 6, you can kind of afford to, add that additional piece with Girgensons there and just kind of have those guys to kind of batten the hatches down when they have to. We look at this blue line, and I think this is definitely the weakest unit on the team. The bottom pair especially just being, an inexperienced kind of rotating door of players, but that does also offer the opportunity for Lightning to go out and kind of address that if they need to, because I think the forward core is pretty well, I don't think they need to add anything to the forward core at this point. Obviously Victor Hedman's still very good. Victor Hedman has taken a step back. Lightning fans don't like to talk about it, but it has happened. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but Victor Hedman isn't the player he was, a couple years ago. But, overall, I still think this is a very good unit. It's a unit that you have obviously Hedman, who's still, a number one defenseman, but Ryan McDonagh too. I mean, bringing back Ryan McDonagh was a expensive player to bring back, but it was somebody that, one, knew this system, worked exceptionally well in the system, very similar to what Yanni Gourde was, but also could still be a super effective, second pair defenseman, and I think Ryan McDonagh fits that bill exceptionally well. Then you have, Erik Cernak, who has kind of fell off a little bit from the expectations, right? I think when they moved out Mikhail Sergachev, they kind of expected Cernak to step in and be that true number 3 guy. They have JJ Moser, who I really like, but again, I have, some concerns about him as a, true top 4 defenseman. And then, the depth on this team isn't, anything world beating, but overall, I think the top 4 is good enough, especially if Ryan McDonagh and Victor Hedman can at least, sustain the level that they're at now. If they don't do that, then this team could be kind of in trouble defensively. And I think this is definitely my biggest concern, because it's a group that I think is fragile in terms of, the star potential here, but it's also just an old group. So regression could happen, especially when you look at, the top guys on this team. They're both, Hedman and McDonagh are older now. I have more concern about McDonagh taking a step back, but it is something to consider when looking at this blue line. I think that could be the Achilles heel for this team, is just the defense just kind of not falls apart, but takes a step back, and they don't have anything to kind of, mend those gashes, at least internally at the moment. We get into Victor Hedman, and kind of like what I said, his defensive numbers have fell off. He's not the stout two-way defender he used to be, but his offensive numbers are still very good. He's still generating a ton of offense. He's still very good on the power play. All the things that Victor Hedman's been good at for a very long time offensively, he's still very good at, but it's just the defensive play has taken a step back. He does tend to become a better defender in the playoffs, so it is possible that it's very much just an effort thing where he just doesn't really care much in the regular season, which is it's fair. The Florida Panthers are, they have a whole team of players like that. So there is spurts where he can kind of turn it back, but as a whole, I think that the overall play is definitely a lot more inconsistent defensively than it used to be, and that is a concern to some extent. Again, I'm not freaking out about it. I don't think it's like a game-changing thing, but it is there still. And 34 going on 35, I don't know how much you can really expect from him, but still a very, very good top defenseman, but I don't put him into that top 5 category anymore. I think he's moved out of that, especially overall, just because the consistency isn't there as much. Victor Hedman's, again, 35 going on 36. This is, an old group, but he's in the last year of his deal here, and he really is a very strong two-way defenseman. His finishing and his goal scoring is very much not really there, so it's hard for me to value him exceptionally in an offensive standpoint, but defensively he's still really, really good. Plays against very steep competition, puts up very, very strong defensive numbers. And again, it's like I've talked about with so many of these older defensemen. He's not doing it from a physical standpoint. It's very much an IQ standpoint, is why he's such a good defender. And you saw as soon as he came back to Tampa Bay, he just immediately became a top tier defender again. So I really it's very much an IQ thing. It's very much just being able to read plays very well. So I don't have a ton of concern from a speed standpoint, a reaction standpoint, because he's just putting himself in position to stop those defensive plays before they become before they lead to goals and chances against. So that shouldn't really go away, even if there is a step in speed that gets taken away a little bit. But overall, Ryan McDonagh is still an exceptional defender, and he does have an offensive spark, albeit one that is going to start to decline, and obviously the scoring itself has taken a step back there. But overall, just as a number 2 defenseman, still brings a ton of value. Erik Cernak, like I said, I feel like Erik Chernak's been a little disappointing. He's been fine, but he's been disappointing in the sense that I think the idea was that they were going to move Sergachev out and Erik Cernak was going to step up and become that number 3 guy or even number 2 guy pre McDonagh trade. and it hasn't happened, and I don't think it will at this point. We're talking about somebody who's 28 right now at this point. Having him jump up from being a number 4 defenseman to a number 2 defenseman at this stage in his career is asking a lot. I think there's still a little bit of juice left here to squeeze out, but I don't see a massive role jump happening for him at this point. I think there's been too many seasons in a row now where he's been disappointing after a very good start to his career. And I think that again, this is somebody they have locked up to a pretty big deal. And I really think that acquiring another defenseman who is not relatively young, but just in that 27, 28-year-old range would be very good for this blue line, because again, like you don't, this could be Ryan McDonough's last season. Victor Hedman's getting up there, so you don't know how many years he has left. Getting yourself that safety blanket is very important, because I don't think JJ Moser and Eric Chernak are going to be a world-beating top pair defensive unit in like 2 years, if that's the route they go in. As a number 3-4 guy, Chernak's fine, but again, like he hasn't put up any numbers that over the last 2 years that I'm like freaking out about and raving about, which is disappointing, because again, like he started his career off very, very strong, and he kind of peaked younger and now has kind of lost that step. So maybe there's still room for him to get it back. There's still room for him to find his game again, but it's been a couple years now, and it hasn't really come to fruition yet. So he's somebody I'm kind of on a wait and see basis with, but for the long-term success of the Tampa Bay Lightning, beyond this season, they either need to figure out what's going on or find a replacement to be the next number 1 defenseman on this team. And finally, JJ Moser, again, like pretty well-rounded, overall defenseman. He took a nice step defensively last season. I think that will continue. His offense has been pretty consistent overall. He has been developing year over year, but 24 years old, he's not. I think that not a top pair defenseman kind of guy, but somebody that just is a reliable, second pair guy. I really like JJ Moser. He's pretty well-rounded defenseman. There's no massive hole in his game. He's just kind of okay at everything. And being a jack of all trades player, somebody you can kind of throw around your lineup is useful. But again, for a team that's hoping that they can find their next number 1 defenseman, I definitely don't think it's in JJ Moser, at least to this point, barring a pretty massive jump up in his play this season. But overall, like as a second pair guy, definitely a solid option, somebody that I like and I think will surpass Eric Chernak maybe even as soon as this season in terms of value. So like in that sense, he's a nice player for this team, but again, like it's not a long-term, number 1 defenseman solution. And I don't think that's the reason they brought him in either, but, overall still very solid second pair defenseman. I do like JJ Moser. Finally, we jump into the goalies here. And like I said, like the concern here is more the postseason play, right? Andrei Vasilevskiy has been poor in the postseason the last couple years, and it's an ugly discussion because people don't like to talk about it, because he's like one of the best goalies of this generation. He won 2 Stanley Cups. He's been to 4 finals, I guess. And you don't want to sit here and just be like he sucks now, and that's not what I'm saying, right? I think he's one of the better goalies in the league, but I think that if we're going to criticize Connor Hellebuyck for his recent playoff failures, I think we have to have the same conversation with Andrei Vasilevskiy, right? Like I get he just won, a couple cups, 5 years ago, but his last, couple runs in the playoffs have been a little ugly, and in terms of goals saved have expected over that time, he's right down there with Connor Hellebuyck, the basement of the league, and it's something that is going to he's going to have to refine that game. If Tampa Bay wants to be really serious about being a Stanley Cup contender, they need Andrei Vasilevskiy to be Andrei Vasilevskiy, right? And I mean, regular season wise, his numbers have been very good. There's no real debate in that sense, right? Like he's been a very good goalie in the regular season, but it's just getting back to that playoff style that he was in, during the cup runs, and he can do it. He's done it before. He's only 30 years old. There's a long leash in terms of his age there. So I'm not, very worried about that in that sense. But it's just, being able to kind of get back to that, being that level, because team players on the other side of the ice are still pretty afraid of him, based on the player polls and stuff. So that's a positive you have there. You have that mental side on the players already, but it's just his numbers have to bounce back to be good in the playoffs, and that's if the Lightning are going to contend for a Stanley Cup, and I certainly think this team is good enough to do that. Vasilevsky's numbers are going to have to go back up, and I have faith that he can do it. I still think he's one of the better goalies in the NHL. So it's not like I'm not looking at him and being like he stinks, they need to find a new goalie. It's just he hasn't been very good in the postseason the last couple of years. He needs to figure that out. And again, like, he has a track record of being the best goalie in the league. So I don't really have much concern surrounding that. Looking at the special teams unit, obviously the power play is going to be very good, as we just talked about with all their players, but it's under a penalty kill unit, led by, Yanni Gourde being an exceptional penalty killer. Ryan McDonough is still a very good penalty killer. Hagel, Cirelli are, good enough. Andre Vasilevsky is one of the best penalty kill goalies in the NHL. Overall, I do think that they have a very, very strong special teams unit. I mean, the power play is going to be really good. Their special teams numbers last year were really good, despite the maybe lower grades on their players than you'd probably expect from a team that I've ranked this high in the special teams unit. But Andre Vasilevsky has just been so exceptional on the penalty kill that I have to credit that a ton too. And the goalie rankings on the penalty kill do affect their special team score. So because they're a penalty killer as well. So there we go. That is my NHL. That is my deep dive video on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Let me know what you think of the Lightning down below. Let me know if you still think that they are a Stanley Cup contender, because I certainly do. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like. We have 3 more of these to go. There's 2 teams in the West, 1 in the East. I'm sure you can figure out which the Eastern team, which Eastern team is left. But the order of the 2 West teams will come out as we continue this. But thank you for watching. And the NHL season is so close. If I plan this right, it should be at the end of this week, give or take. I don't know, a couple days. But that's the way I have these scheduled. The last video for this series, by the way, I believe is supposed to come out on the day before the regular season starts. So I want to have the entire series done before the actual start of the regular season. So go watch them if you haven't watched these. It'll help prepare you for what to expect for this season. But thank you for watching, and we will see you as I hit my table in the next video.